welcome to Brain Chat. I'm Dr. Mitzi Joy Williams, your board-certified neurologist and MS specialist, and my mission is to engage, educate, and empower those affected by MS to become an active part of their healthcare team. Here on Brain Chat, we'll be discussing all things MS, health and wellness, advocacy, and we'll even throw a little bit of music and music therapy in there as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode. Happy Monday, everybody. It's Dr. Mitzi, the nerdy neurologist, and I am so excited to be back with you guys live for another episode of Brain Chat. And this one is going to be action-packed. Listen, y'all, you do not want to miss this, this episode. We are going to have a good time. I have some amazing guests, and we are going to talk about care partners of those living with MS. I have my Caregiver Strong shirt on, Brandy Evans brand, as she cares for her mom who has MS. And, I just want to take some time out to applaud and acknowledge all of those care partners who are, fighting MS along with their loved ones. And we're just going to talk about some of those practical issues. And we've got some amazing people to give some advice for those who are out there caring for those with multiple sclerosis. And it is National Caregivers Month, if I'm not mistaken. So it's an appropriate time to talk about this topic. So let's get right into it. So for those of you who are viewing us, you can always type in the chat where you are viewing us from. I'd love to hear from you guys. I bid you greetings from Atlanta, Georgia, where the weather does not know what it wants to do. I don't know if it's cold or hot or what's going on here. All right, so let's get into it. Let me introduce my guest so we can get into this conversation. I'm going to start with John Strum. I'm so honored to have John with me tonight. He is the host of the award-winning podcast Real Talk MS. So I have been interviewed by John many times, and I'm excited to interview him today on Brain Chat. He is a recurring guest for us. Since his podcast Real Talk MS has launched, he's had over 300 episodes, over 2 million downloads from people all over the world, over 100 different countries. He also hosts the National MS Society's weekly Ask the MS Expert webcast. He cared for his wife, Jeannie, who was diagnosed with progressive MS in 1997. He served as her caregiver until she lost her battle in February 2020. And his story and their story is featured in a documentary called Seeing MS from the Inside Out, which premiered in 2018 at one of the national or international MS meetings in Berlin, Germany. He is a member of the National MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. He is a Patient Center Outcomes Research Institute ambassador and a district activist leader and trustee for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. And he chairs the MS Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. Welcome, John. Welcome back to Brain Chat, my friend.
Dr. Mitzi, so glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. All right. And I'm going to introduce our next guest, Teresa Wright Johnson, and her husband and care partner, Marvin Johnson. She is a congenital heart disease survivor and multiple sclerosis warrior. She's a distinguished patient advocate, inspirational speaker, author, and consultant. She graduated from Rutgers University with a background in criminal justice, social services, and supervision, and she is a retired senior parole officer. She's a columnist, contributor, and guest writer for multiple patient advocacy sites, and she serves on the board of directors as the vice chairman of the U.S. Heart Valve Voice, board of directors member of the Lehigh Valley American Heart Association, and engagement committee member and co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Subcommittee for I Conquer MS and the Multiple Sclerosis Association of America, African American Advisory Board member. She is here with her husband of 19 years, Marvin Johnson, who is also a retired public servant. Welcome to Brain Chat.
Hi, Dr.
Hey,
Mitzi.
Dr. Mitzi, how you doing?
Listen, I'm out of breath just introducing you guys. I mean, I just am so excited and honored to have you all on tonight to talk about a topic that is really important, right? The role of care partners, in multiple sclerosis, because we know MS affects each individual differently, but it affects the whole family. It doesn't just affect that person, but it affects their spouse, their children, their loved ones. And so, I think it's important for people to know, about about what that role entails, how to communicate, how to help, and how to, maybe fall back when it's time to fall back. So I'm looking forward to having an amazing conversation with you guys.
Yes. So are we.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. So let's start by just telling us a little bit about kind of your journey and how, MS came to be a part of your life. And I'll start with you, John.
Well, as you mentioned when you introduced me, my wife Jeannie was diagnosed in 1997. She was diagnosed with progressive MS, and the progression happened really kind of fast. I actually stopped working for just about 11 years to be her caregiver. And uh, as you said, MS impacts families, not just individuals. And I kind of experienced that firsthand in supporting her. Um, I learned how to be a pretty good caregiver by first making every possible mistake you could make. So, I learned the hard way, but
Yeah.
did eventually learn some things that I think are valuable and make life a little easier for care partners.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to get into it, right? Teresa and Marvin, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yes, Dr. Mitzi. So I cannot speak about my MS journey without first mentioning my status as a congenital heart disease patient. So I started as a patient from birth, really, and grew into this role of being a patient. MS met me unexpectedly in 2014. That's when I was diagnosed. And as someone who had been used to living with chronic illness, who knew what to expect with heart disease, who had really already became became familiar with that trajectory and really conquered every odd. When MS came, it really knocked me for a loop. And when MS came, I had a husband. Marvin and I were married when I received that diagnosis. So that just added another layer to us because he knew that he would be my care partner because he knew about my heart condition. But we got this new diagnosis where we had to make room for that and we had to adjust to that and we had to talk about that and what that meant for us individually and us together as a couple.
And so, Marvin, tell us a little bit about that, that that transition, right? So you have, a wife who has a chronic condition, and then on top of that is diagnosed with another chronic condition. Kind of how did that change your thought process as a care partner, or what were you thinking when that happened?
Well, I'm gonna go back to the genesis of this when we first met.
Mm-hmm.
I had transferred to her office, and at that time she was out of work. She just had her I think second surgery for her heart valve, heart valve. So when she did come back, we got together and we became friends. And she, we basically went to the next level. But prior to that, she had spoken to me about her situation. Would I be ready for it? Being a care partner, and if I can really handle it. And I said, I'm a mature man. I deal with things. I know how to cope with things. So with that situation, she prepared me for this journey. So I took the leap anyway. I took that leap of faith, and we wound up getting married. So we continued that situation. So in 2014, when we received the diagnosis, that prepared that 12, 13 years prior to the diagnosis of MS, being that I was a care partner for her and with her heart situation, it really prepared me for it. So like most people who would not have that experience, it might have been a great shock to them. But I really acclimated to the situation and it just emboldened me to become a better care partner because I know I had an additional situation to deal with other than her heart condition. So it truly emboldened me. It didn't intimidate me, and we take it day by day.
You don't look easily intimidated, Marvin.
No, no, no. I had a good high school football coach who instilled some good values in us.
Good, good, good,
They make
good.
us so strong. He made boys out of men. So
Yeah,
yes, he
yeah,
instilled a self
yeah.
discipline and very
So so let's talk about, so John, you mentioned that, you learned to be a good care partner because of some of the mistakes you made. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and kind of what you learned and what you grew from that helped you to become a better care partner for Jeannie?
Probably would have learned this a lot sooner if I had some training as a flight attendant. Because what do they tell you before you take off?
Hmm.
Secure your own mask before
Mm,
helping others with theirs.
yeah.
And that is the best inside tip I could ever provide any care partner or future care partner is don't forget to care for the caregiver.
Mm,
Um, I think that very often when we step into that role, for many of us, it is a very selfless kind of a commitment. You tend to, well, I don't know what you tend to do. I can tell you I tended to forget an awful lot about myself and my needs and really focused on the many needs that my wife had. And as a result, I don't think I did my health any favors, quite
mm,
honestly.
mm,
And that becomes dangerous because when you put the care partner at risk, you run the risk of ending up with two people who need support. You have
right.
the person who's living with MS, and now you have their care partner who needs help too. So caring for the care partner is a great way to be a better care partner because it ensures you're going to be there for that person.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I like that analogy on the plane, putting your oxygen mask on first before you help someone else. But sometimes it's so hard, right? You get caught up in, just trying to be there for that person. I am not a care partner for someone living with MS, but I do have family members that I care for. I have patients that I care for. I care for people all the time, and it's so easy to lose track of yourself. So, what does that look like practically? What does self care for the care partner look like?
I think, for each person, it's probably a little different, but you want to make sure that if you have personal interests, that you try to maintain a connection with them. It may
Mhm.
be different, it may look different than it did before, but you want to try to be connected to the things that you were connected to prior. You want to make sure you take care of your health. I mean, we should start there. It's the most important thing. And I found, frankly, I was going to all of my wife's appointments with her neurologist and other specialists, never missed one, but
Mhm.
I sure wasn't seeing my physician.
Mm,
And so you want to make sure that you don't let your own medical uh, status slide by overlooking it.
right.
Those are just some of the basic steps that I think make a huge difference. Take time out to exhale every day. That doesn't take long, but it can make a huge difference if you take a moment for yourself and just try to get centered. Um, these things, I think, add to your longevity as a care partner, frankly.
Right. Because you can't care for someone else if you're laid up in, the hospital or laid up in the bed sick yourself.
You sure
What are
can.
your thoughts, Marvin, about, self-care for the care partner?
Thank you for asking me. Dr. Mitzi, I've established my own personal paradigm. And what I do, I establish the 4 Ps. I have a model called the 4 Ps.
Mhm.
And first P is called poise. I try to establish poise to stay, not to get too high and not to get too low. So
Mhm.
I try to keep my poise. This is on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Number 2 is patience. It's an important attribute. You must have patience. This is a journey, I realize, and it's not a sprint.
Mhm.
Number 3 is perseverance. Perseverance because you know you're going to have adversity, and sometimes it's unexpected. So you must have that perseverance to overcome that adversity to make you a
Mhm.
stronger person, to help your a medical warrior and yourself. And positivity. I try to stay positive around her,
Mhm.
and for our mental health. I think by staying positive, not letting her see me down, even if I am down, it's going to keep her positive, or hopefully keep her spirits up. So
Mhm.
I follow them 4 Ps on a
Mhm.
daily, weekly, and monthly and yearly basis.
Mhm.
That helps me.
Yeah, those are great points. And then, in terms of, some of the things for things that you do to, um care for yourself, making sure you keep up with, doctor's visits and things like that. Are there other
Yeah.
things that you do to care for yourself in the midst
Yes,
of
I
helping
do.
care with Teresa?
I try to stay active.
Okay.
Try to stay active. I'm involved in summertime. I normally play tennis and golf, and in wintertime I'll play racquetball
Hmm.
and swim. We have an indoor swimming
So you're a
pool.
sports guy.
I'm a sports person.
Yeah,
No
so
doubt.
exercise is a great way to,
It's a great way.
decrease
Yes,
stress and,
absolutely.
to, keep yourself healthy and
Yeah,
active.
it's a panacea for stress, no doubt, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. So I'm hearing some great points here, about, the first step, it sounds like, to being a great care partner is to make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, yes,
And however that looks, taking care of yourself when you're going to the doctor, also making sure you're doing things that you enjoy or staying connected to hobbies so that you don't get so encapsulated with everything with, your loved one that you don't have anything left.
yes,
So let's talk about kind of the practical part, right? So, for someone who is, new to MS, or someone, whose loved one is new to MS, kind of what advice would you give them as they're starting out on their journey as a care partner, right? So I have some patients who come in with their care partners and they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. I don't know where to start, and some people, can be overprotective where they don't want you to move or do anything, and the other person feels helpless. And then sometimes it could be the other way where, people are like, well, you can do all of this. I'm not going to do anything. And then, they need help, but they're afraid to ask for help. So, kind of, how do you strike that balance between knowing when to kind of step in and knowing when to say, okay, well, let me encourage this person to try to do that? Because that can be a tough line to kind of walk. I'll start with you, John.
yeah,
It can be a tough line to walk. As you were saying that, I was thinking of an example in my own household. My wife always took care of the bills.
Mhm.
She loved doing finance, so that was her thing. And there came a time when I realized she couldn't be doing that anymore.
Hmm.
And it's hard because that was not only something she did that I didn't have to worry about, but it was also something that was part of who she was. It was part of her definition of who this woman is. She's the one who takes care of all the financial stuff, and I realized that had to change.
Hmm.
And it was difficult because in our relationship, it was very much a 50-50 partnership, or I like to say 100-100 partnership,
100. Mm-hmm.
but it was equal.
Yeah.
And this is when I came to realize not only wasn't it going to be equal, but it couldn't be equal.
Hmm.
There were things that I needed to take off of her shoulders that
Hmm.
she couldn't be burdened with. And having that conversation was tricky.
Hmm.
It was tough because it wasn't just about paying bills. It
Right.
was about relationship dynamics. It
Right.
was about self definition. It
Right.
was about all kinds of things that really go to the core of who she is, who I am, and what our relationship is sort of about. So even something that simple became tricky. But if you don't have the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
it just multiplies the problems you're going to face down the road.
Right.
So it's not an elective. And I think that each couple, each family is going to address it a little differently based upon what their dynamics are
Yes.
all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you,
100%.
for sharing that, John. So Teresa and Marvin, how do you guys navigate conversations in terms of, hey, I need some help, or hey, this needs to change? How has that changed over the course of, you guys
Mhm.
partnership over the past, almost 20 years?
So, Dr. Missy, I'm going to jump in first.
Mm-hmm.
I was a care partner to both of my parents who
Mm-hmm.
are now deceased.
Hmm.
So, what I've learned from that experience, because remember, I was always the person being cared for. Caring for my parents really gave me a window view of what the life of a care partner entails.
Hmm.
So, with that information, I was able to glean certain things that my husband may experience or may go through. And I was also really able to understand the struggle and the heavy toll that I'm sure my parents carried in the care of myself. So, to your question, I say to that, I am very independent and I try to do things on my own.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were very independent people. And I remember my mother got sick first. And when it was time to care for my mother, I would tell her, oh, mommy, let me do that. Let me do that. Let me help you and let me do this. And it was a struggle for me, really, to learn what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Because as a person who loves and cares for somebody, you want to do all that you can for them.
Right.
But what I learned is sometimes you have to leave that person with some of their independence. And sometimes you have to let them set the tone for what they need. So in my personal relationship with our marriage, it was very difficult for me to ask for help initially. But as we've grown together and we've become malleable, I can go to my husband and I can say, okay, Marvin, I need help with this. Can you help me get up? Can you help me do this? And then, another level is that there are some times where he assists when I may not even recognize or realize I need the help.
Hmm.
So I think when you grow together and you're married to someone or you're caring for someone, you become attuned to their needs.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts? Tell us your thoughts, Marvin.
Well, I'm going to piggyback a little bit here. She's right. She's a strong, independent woman. We both are strong, independent people. So we have a lot of pride. So for her to ask me for help, she really has to be seriously in pain. I mean, she's always in pain, but I mean, truly in pain. But if she could, she would walk a mile before she ever needed assistance with a cane or anything like that. She's gonna do it on her own. So she's gonna make a attempt at it. So yes, she's a very independent woman. But I wanted to emphasize for all our caregivers who are listening and watching, it's important to communicate. Communication is one important tool you must have between your partner. And another thing I emphasize is that you have to make every attempt to be at every appointment with the doctor, so you know exactly what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I always make sure, even when I was working, no matter what, I was going to be there. Even if I had an appointment at my job, she comes first. She was priority and nothing else. So I would always emphasize to the caregivers that make sure you make every attempt to be at the appointments of your care part. Your medical warriors. I like to emphasize medical warriors because you're all medical warriors.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit kind of about the role, at home, knowing when to, help, knowing when to assist, knowing when to have those hard conversations, right? That, maybe there are things that, we used to do that maybe we shouldn't be doing, and maybe we need to transition to, kind of adjusting those roles. So let's touch a little bit about the medical appointments, right? So, John, I heard you say a little bit earlier, you were trying to be at every appointment and missing your own appointments. Marvin definitely emphasizing the importance of being at those appointments. Fortunately now we have technology. So, I have spouses on the phone, they're on FaceTime, so, you can be there without being there now,
yes,
which maybe wasn't the case back in the 90s or the early 2000s. But let's talk about the role of the care partner as part of the healthcare team, right? So we talk a lot now about this concept of shared decision making, right? Where now, we as physicians are trying not to be, paternalistic and saying, this is what you need to do. You need to go home and do it, right? We sit down and we talk with everyone and we try to figure out what's the best plan of action for that person. I found that care partners are really a key part of the healthcare team because they can help provide additional perspective, right? I've got some patients, who will tell me everything, even more than I want to know. And then I've got some that don't tell me anything, and they're like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And then they come with their spouse and the spouse is like, no, they're not. They are not doing good. And then there are other times where you may be being honest and transparent, as a person living with MS with your healthcare team, but your care partner can still provide a different perspective. There may be things you've forgotten. There may be things that you may not observe, things that have changed over time. So let's talk about the role of the care partner as part of the healthcare team. And I'll start with you guys, Teresa and Marvin.
Yes, absolutely. Just as you said, Dr. Mitzi, there are times when Marvin comes to me to an appointment and my care team will ask him, what does he feel? What does he think is going on there? Is there anything that he notices? Because again, there are some things that I may not be cognizant of. There are some things that I may just take as normal that your care partner may see. So that perspective is very important. And the truth is, like you just said, Dr. Mitzi, when you go to an appointment, that partner or that person sees you most of the time, almost every day, especially if it's your spouse. So there are certain things that they may pick up on or they may take note of that you may not necessarily remember. And, even in my role as care partners to my parents, when it was time for us to see the doctor, there was certain things that I was able to express to the doctor. And there were certain things that I said, okay, I think you need to look at this because this happened. So we have to understand that the person living with illness is really the center of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
But every piece around that center matters. And it's all information, right? That is derivative of a person's, of their space right now, but also that contributes to ultimate and overall optimal health. So I'm really, really happy when he accompanies me, which is most of the time, if not all of the time, because my care team will ask him because they know him so well. And, Marvin never meets a stranger. So
this is true.
It's true, right? They will always ask him, how is Teresa doing? And not to exclude me because Dr. Mitzi, you already know, I know how to stand up and speak up for myself, but
Absolutely.
they will always ask him, how do you think she's doing? Is there anything that you notice? And I think that is such an important part of a visit, to bring that person in, the person who sees behind the scenes and glean all the information that you can.
Marvin?
How can I follow that? But I like to emphasize this one thing. Establish a rapport with the neurologist and your medical warriors, doctor. That's the first thing I tried to do, establish a rapport. And now I got a great rapport with her doctor. And I suggest that for any other care partners to do that. Don't be uncomfortable speaking to him or her. And I'm not. I ask him questions and he asks me questions and we have a good rapport. So I feel comfortable with him now. And so we all are getting to contribute to her journey. We're gonna combat this thing. We're gonna combat it, and we're gonna stay strong throughout this journey. And caregivers are ancillaries, our care partners, I should say, like ancillaries to the medical warriors. So they're there to observe, and they can see the pain they're going through. All right, emotionally, and that's why with her, I could observe her pain, and say, "Missy, are you in serious pain?" And she'll acknowledge it, and then we can work on proceeding on what we need to do to overcome the situation. But yes,
Absolutely.
it's the teamwork. It's the teamwork.
Mhm.
Tell us about your perspective, John.
Not real different from what Marvin and Teresa have already pointed out. I think that as a care partner, you're in I like to say that you're fighting the same war, but you're one foxhole over.
Yeah, I
So
like
your
that. I like that
pers-
analogy. Thank you.
your perspective is just a little different. I saw that we'd go in for an appointment with my wife's neurologist, and they'd say, "So, how have things been lately?" And if she had a good week or so, everything was fine. And if she had a difficult week or so, well, things weren't very good.
Right.
But I would often say, "Well, yeah, but remember 2 months ago when you couldn't do this or that happened?" And so I just think having a slightly different perspective gives the physician a better patient profile. You get a more 360-degree kind of a point of view of what that person may actually be going through. And I think that's really helpful. I also think care partners can be very helpful when it comes to adhering to a treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
There
Talk about
comes,
that.
Yes.
right? There comes a day where you don't feel like taking that disease modifying therapy, or you don't feel like working out, or you don't feel like even getting out of bed some days.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think a care partner can be such a huge help in motivating their partner to take that DMT, to follow through with that workout, whatever it might be. I think that more than a cheerleader, they can be a motivator. And as Marvin said, you're in it together. And
Yeah.
this is where I think care partner can bring a lot of support
Mm-hmm.
to the relationship at the moments where probably it's needed the most. So I think it's great for adhering to a treatment plan.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that, a care partner, depending on how involved they want to be, and everybody will find their own comfort level there.
Right.
They can be, you know, listening to your podcast, watching your Facebook lives, maybe even listening to another podcast that's very popular out there.
Called
But
Real Talk and Mess.
they can be doing their homework, and so they can recommend things.
Right.
There are people with MS who don't really want to spend all day long hearing about it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to hear about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as a care partner, maybe you can brush up on some of the things that are new or changing or improving. And you might want to say to your partner, "Hey, there's a new treatment, and I heard Dr. Mitzi talking about, really positive results when we go see your neurologist. Let's ask about it." So I think they can bring a lot of value to that patient by doing some of the homework on their own.
Absolutely. I mean, all excellent points. And I think the other piece is that, oftentimes that care partner sometimes takes some of the burden off of the person in the appointment of remembering everything, so that person
Right.
can really stay engaged. I have some of my patients where, the care partner, whether it's a spouse, it might be, a parent or a sibling or, even a child,
Right.
and that person will be sitting there taking notes about what we're saying, and then the patient can really stay engaged in the visit and they don't have to worry about, wait, I need to write down everything Dr. Mitzi said, or, I need to get out my phone. We can really kind of, be able to have a relaxed visit and kind of talk through things. I think the other thing that care partners can really help with is sometimes my patients don't want to tell me the truth. So
Mm.
I call the care partners the truth tellers, right? And I think that it's really important because, I have some of my patients that are like, oh, you weren't supposed to tell Dr. Williams that I'm not bringing you back, right? And it's not that someone is telling on you necessarily or saying doing anything negative, but I can't help you if I don't know what's going on, right? The doctor can't help if you're not being honest, and sometimes we know people aren't being honest. I have people come in and say they don't smoke and they literally smell like, I'm like, come on guys, like, um, but that other person can really help make sure that we're looking at things from the right perspective. Because, if you come in and say you're okay and we keep you on the same treatment when you're really not doing okay and we need to make a switch,
Mm.
it's not helping you, as a patient, if that person is not able to really, be honest. And so I think, there's accountability there with that care partner, and that accountability is really important to make sure that we're making the right decisions together. So, what kind of, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered a lot of ground. Let's talk about some ways to kind of facilitate, or what are some tips to facilitate communication? So, John, you talked about sometimes conversations are tricky. What are some of your top tips that you learned in communicating as a care partner with that loved one with MS?
Let me start by reinforcing what Marvin said earlier about communication. It is so vitally important.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, perhaps especially. Now, I want to point out first that most people with MS never reach the condition my wife did reach. Their
Mm-hmm.
level of disability is far milder. Thank goodness for that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it wasn't true for her. And the reason I point that out is it was so important that we had established a foundation of strong communication, because there came a day when she could no longer speak.
Mm.
And when that happened, our communication changed, didn't stop, but I would make sure I put everything that we needed to talk about or I wanted to talk about. And sometimes it was just conversational stuff, I put it all in a question form that could be answered with a yes or no, and she could nod her head yes or shake her head no. Then there came a time where she couldn't move her head.
Mm.
And all we did was change so that she could communicate with me by blinking once for yes and twice for no.
Mm-hmm.
And that communication worked for both of us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was getting her input and her feedback on things. She was hearing from me and found a way to respond. So when I kind of said, so what you're saying is, she could agree with it or tell me, no, I still wasn't getting it. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
circle back. But hopefully this is something that an awful lot of people listening right now won't have to think about. But
Mm-hmm.
having a strong foundation of communication can serve you in ways you cannot predict. And in our case, it was very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, fortunately, our communication style predated her diagnosis with MS.
Mm-hmm.
We talked things through. We shared everything with each other. We arrived at mutual decisions when there were decisions about the two of us, about our household or whatever it might be. So that was sort of already in place. And thank goodness it was, because communication becomes so important when sometimes that communication has to do with important medical issues.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you and Jeannie married?
We were married, well, so we were together almost 5 years when she was diagnosed. And then we were together for another 23 after that.
Mm-hmm.
The last 6 years, she was nonverbal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jeannie several times. She was such a delight, and we're so sorry we lost her in 2020. But what a blessing, that you continue to keep those lines of communication open, because I think it's also important to recognize, that even though there is disability, that person with MS is still there. They still have thoughts and feelings. And I see, some patients who are very disabled where people make decisions kind of without them, so it's important to, as much as possible, keep those lines of communication open and make sure you're getting that person's input. And the other thing I'm hearing, John, is that communication changes over time, right? Depending on, where we are in life, what we have going on, definitely depending on level of disability, you have to be able to adjust and to try to, keep those lines open, even when the ability in that relationship dynamic may change some.
Sure, I think that's really important, and it's also important to, part of the reason I think communication between Jeannie and I worked is because I always remembered to honor the nature of our relationship.
Mm.
sometimes when you're caring for someone who requires a lot of support in every imaginable activity of daily life, um, it's easy to take on the role, more of a parental kind of a role. You pointed out one person's making all the decisions, one person's doing a lot, right? And I think that being able to do a lot and is not always a good reason to do a lot. You want to make sure you honor your relationship at whatever the status happens to be. You know, physical status changes a relationship. It doesn't have to define it.
That's a word right there. That's a word. Tell us your thoughts, Teresa and Marvin, about keeping that line of communication open, how that communication may change over time.
Dr. Missy, and John, you just brought up so many different points. First, I want to say that when we recognize, like you and John just reiterated, that the person is a person, that they matter, you honor their autonomy, you respect them, you allow them to have their dignity. And communication does change over time. Right now, I'm able to talk directly to Marvin about what I need, what I don't like, what I don't want. I don't know what my future will be. None of us knows what our future will be. But what I do know is Marvin knows who I am intrinsically. He knows how our relationships work and how our relationship works. And he also knows what my wishes are and how I would want to be honored in the event that there were faculties that I did lose. There's another point that I want to make before I pass this over to Marvin, is that we're talking about care partners, and right now we're talking about adults. But I want this to resonate with care partners who are mothers and fathers to their children, because that really was the essence of my story. And from a little girl, I can remember my parents honoring my autonomy, saying that what you have to say matters, that, this is your doctor and we are our parents, but this is you and this is your life and this is your body. And you have a right to say how you feel and what bothers you. And I think that if we can carry that along and just reframe that conversation, I think that we embolden our, as Marvin calls us, medical warriors, or our people living with chronic illness. You embolden them to express their truth and to take a stance and to really be present and know that not only are they entitled to good care, but that they have a voice in their care partnership. So I just wanted to make those points, Dr. Missy. Now I'll pass it over to
Absolutely.
Marvin.
Excellent. Go for it, Marvin.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to come from a different perspective as far as for care partners who are intimate with their medical warriors. Because there's different levels of care partners. And then I only can speak from my perspective in this one. It's very important when we're talking about communication. Is first of all, you got to have appreciation for each other. You have to appreciate each other. Secondly, I think the most important is display affection. You display affection, you keep that connection. And
I love it.
And thirdly, I spoke to a young person when I was at our last conference, and I detected that there were problems with situations. And what I want to emphasize, if there's a situation where you felt rejected, it's not because of rejection. That person loves you, cares for you. It's because they're not in that state of mind at the time. So we got to appreciate our medical warriors and not take that as rejection. And I just want to emphasize it to young couples or whoever, any couples, who are going through that process, don't take it as rejection. I don't take it as rejection. When my wife is not in that situation, she's not in a situation that I'm not in a situation. Our mental status is not. I mean, our mental situation is not at the same plane at a certain time. I'm not going to take that as a rejection. So I just want to emphasize that because it's very important that you stay strong with each other, display your affection, and keep that connection.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point because sometimes it's difficult for people to switch those roles, right? To go from maybe caring for someone in some aspect and then kind of switch that off to, okay, now we're in this kind of mode, And so, I think that advice is so valuable. So listen, y'all, this time has gone by fast.
Wow.
Man, this has been an amazing conversation, And so as we're closing, I just want you all to give some tips to those out there who may be kind of struggling with, where to start or, they may be either in the very beginning or maybe at a period of transition where maybe that loved one with MS may be dealing with some more disability and they may have to take on more. What are some tips that you would give them to navigate the transitions, of being a care partner for a loved one with MS? I'll start with you, John.
Well, I think if someone is newly diagnosed, it's funny. I've seen many situations where the person who is diagnosed with MS, they tend to think of the worst possible outcome in their future, right? I got diagnosed with MS. That means I'm going to be in a wheelchair, even though most of the time that's not right.
Right.
On the other hand, their partner doesn't always think that way. Their partner often doesn't realize they have a role to play because so often when we're diagnosed, we don't appear to have significant disability of any sort, right? So what do they need help with? Well, they're freaking out. They need emotional support. So I think that my point would be read the room and figure out what your role is going to be that day. Because the next day could be different. We all people with MS learn to live with uncertainty. And I think that as a care partner, you need to learn to live with the uncertainty that your partner is living with. So read the room and figure out where you are needed the most. Sometime it'll be as easy as a kind word, a hand on a shoulder, a reassurance. And other times you may have to roll up your sleeves and do quite a bit more or not. Read the room and figure it out.
I love it. What would you all say, Teresa and Marvin?
You want to go first?
I just went. John said he covered most of it. I just would like to add, if you need help and need assistance, look for entities. There's entities out there to help you. Networking. There's a lot of organizations. There's a lot of support groups. Don't be ashamed to seek assistance or help. These entities are here to help you.
Dr. Michigan, I will say, as both a person living with chronic illness and MS and as a person who is a caregiver, take the time you need. Take the time you need to process your new diagnosis if you are newly diagnosed. Know that grief and gratitude can coexist because along with diagnoses comes different feelings, and it's normal. It's okay to have those. And as Marvin said, reach out for help. There are so many people, there are so many organizations, and build your support system. Many of us, we build our support systems because everyone may not have a husband or a wife or a significant other. It may be a mother and a daughter, it may be a parent and a child, but build your support system and know the value that each of you bring to the table, and know that you really have to take the time you need to process the diagnosis and move forward with your life, because the diagnosis is not the end of your life. It's not your final destination. So that's all I would like to say.
Well, listen, I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, you all have been amazing. Thank you so much for your vulnerability, your honesty, providing your perspective. I know will help so many who are watching this podcast after the fact. Thank you to all of those who watched tonight and all those who will be watching the replay. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for another Brain Chat. Thank you so much, John. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Teresa
Thank
and
you.
Marvin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Peace.
Mitzi.
Thank you.
Take care.